My name is Marvin Nelson Pratt, and I was in the 317th Infantry, which is a battalion of the 80th Division, which was here in Salina at one time. I served all through the war, through France and all of Germany, through the whole campaign over there. In school, we had social studies that studied current events, maybe political, but also worldwide. And it was national news as the Germans was taking over everything and doing things over there. And also that the Japanese were doing some threatening on their end over there. Just before Pearl Harbor, if you went to the movies, you seen newsreels, which was generally about a week old. But on December the 7th, I was walking down the street going from one Washington High School to the junior high school for a different class. And we heard on the radio that they'd bombed Pearl Harbor. And, but we had been not really expecting that. We knew that the Japanese were doing some negotiating and so forth over there. And we knew that the German war in Europe was going pretty slow, and they'd been in Africa fighting to get back up through to Italy. And it wasn't very long until I knew that soon as school graduated, I had 1 week, and then I would go into the service. During those school years, I didn't date anybody really very much. We went to dances and so forth. I took a girl to the prom in my senior year. But really, for me, I wasn't thinking about that. I knew I had a war ahead of me, and whether I was going to come back or not wasn't a very good proposition. And so I never took that much interest in the other girls and what went on. Along about 2 months before we graduated from school, we had already had our draft notices and knew just exactly when we was going to be going. And they give us 1 week after we graduated to kind of get things in order and and make up any wills or whatever we might have to do before we left. And then they shipped us to Leavenworth, and we spent 2 weeks there being inoculated, vaccinated, and getting clothes, getting fitted up. And they put us on a train, sent us to California, halfway between San Francisco and Los Angeles. That was Camp Roberts. Camp Roberts. Salinas, California. And it's right in a desert between the mountains and a bunch of sand. And it was hot summertime. And we seen 127 degrees on the thermometer in those barracks with blacktop out on that sand between these mountains. And it was terribly hot. It come retreat in the evening, and we'd have to go out, and reveille in the morning was cool enough. But especially in the evening, you go out and retreat and stand at attention, and the guy in front of you, he just pass out. You just catch him and lay him on the ground and stand back at attention and hope somebody catches you too. As we were inducted, we were given all kinds of tests, and they assigned you to various units, whether it was medical or tanks or whatever type of units you went to. And there was, I don't know, there's all kinds of IQ tests and tests that they give us, but most of them went on for other things, but there was some of us that was picked out to go to the ASTP thing in Montana. After basic training, and they sent me to Montana State College, and it was a barracks up there from the First World War. Didn't even have any inside restrooms, but they quickly built some. And for one semester, they was training us to be engineers to go over and rebuild Germany and Japan after the war. But after one semester of that, they decided that that wasn't the path they was going to follow. So they broke that up and shipped most of us down to Arizona to join the 80th Division, which had been in Salina and was trained and formed in Salina, and then they moved to Arizona for final maneuvers, and they was getting ready to go overseas. And we was all set to go, when it was shipped us to Fort Dix in New Jersey, and we was awaiting to get on a ship to go to France, and the scuttlebutt was they was going to put us on a lightweight victory ship and run us over to France. And when you come up, they was going to make the invasion on D-Day. And when you hit the shores of France, we was to bail off the sides of the ship and walk ashore. And we asked them how deep the water was going to be. And they said, well, we're not too sure. It just depends on how fast we can hit the shore and how far we can go. But they said it'll probably be between 6 and 10 feet. And they said, that's going to be kind of a tough walking. And they says, well, when there's enough bodies down there, you can walk ashore. It didn't sound good. And so finally, they changed their mind on that, and they brought the Queen Mary, the biggest ship of the English, over to New York there, and they put us on the Queen Mary. They had 18,000 troops on one ship. There was 15,000 about 12,000 of our division. And then there was some tank people, and there was some artillery people, and a hospital unit, various components that was going over. When we got in New York getting ready to get on the Queen Mary, they got us down there. It was about midnight down on the docks, and we had to stand and you know, putting 18,000 people on one boat, it takes a while to get them loaded up. And we was way into the afternoon getting on the boat. And when we got on there, my assignment was a closet. And the closet was about 6 by about 7 or 8 feet. And it had 4 hammocks on one side of the door and 4 on the other side. And 8 of us went in, and you had to go in and get in the hammocks because every place was full of things. and you had your luggage, our duffel bags there with us in the thing. And of course, being very, very hungry. And the first thing they did, we got about noon, was got the ship to start out to going. And the limeys called us down, says, come on up and have some stew. And we got out in the hallway and got started up there, and the smell got the best of us, and then the waves on the ocean didn't help any. And limeys had kidney stew. Can you imagine a bunch of kidneys being stewed and what it smelled like? Oh, that was and we hadn't had anything from the day before to eat. We was all in a hallway, and the guy in front got sick, of course, on the front, the guy and him, and the guy behind, and I got sick too, but I don't think I threw up. I was a corporal. I could do a little more than some of the rest of the guys, and I just slipped back down and got in my bunk and just hid out, even though I was supposed to be up there. And they also had drills during the trip. In case we got torpedoed or something like that, they had evacuation drills, and we run into the same thing in the hallways. And I managed to be hid whenever we had any of the drills, so that I didn't have to take part. On the ship, I decided that I would volunteer for a cleanup duty. So I volunteered to go around on the ship and empty wastebaskets. And you had a badge. There was a white area, a green area, and a blue area, and then I think you had a black badge that could go any place. So they give me a black badge, and I was to go around the hallways and pick up trash and so forth, and then go back and dump it in the ocean off of the back of the fantail. So I could go any place I wanted in the ship, and I went down and looked in the motor room and every place. The big swimming pool in the Queen Mary, they had boarded over, and the top of it was the dining room, and underneath that was where they kept their kidneys for their kidney stew, I guess. But that's where they kept the food in there on the ship. And that Queen Mary, after they got about 10 miles out, started zigzagging across the ocean, and all airplanes and escort people left, and we went across in 7 days and ended up in Scotland. When we landed in Scotland there, they put us on some trucks and took us just across the border. I don't know how far it is in there. I don't think it was 50 miles, just a short distance, but we was in England part then. And that's where we had our tents. I went out and bought a bicycle from some British person there, and then I took some tours around this couple of little towns and places around in there, kind of met people and got away from the camp when I could and got back again. So we never got to see that much there. We was too interested in what was going on in the air war and on the beaches over there, what we was going to have. The progress in the invasion in June, they were still just in the hedgerows on France, just had a very, very beachhead. They'd been a month in there, and in the battle, we were still going to have a battle getting in. Finally, they took us down and loaded us on a small ship. The ship had been over in Africa and in some battles, and where the captain's tower or the headquarters deal is up on the ship, the office and so forth, it had been blown clear off. And they had taken some old 2x4s and some boards and nailed up and made a little wooden shack up there so they could still operate that ship. And that's what hauled us on over to the beach and loaded down a landing thing, and we just walked off in dry. We didn't have to do the swimming or anything like that. And we just walked on up and on the hillside. And just the day before that, they was breaking out of the hedgerows. They was moving out and was getting the Germans run back. And so we was on the ground probably almost 24 hours until we got our trucks and our cannons and all our equipment and so forth and got it on there. And we loaded it up on our stuff and took off in a convoy. And we was breaking out, and we took off going across France, and our route of attack was right straight towards Paris. But when we got in sight of Paris, just ahead of us, the general come on and announced that we're not going to Paris. We are going around it on the outside. He says, if I get you guys in Paris, it'll take me 60 days to round you up again. He says, we're not going to Paris. So we went out and circled Paris and headed north. The Germans had pulled pretty well all back until they got up to the Moselle River. And they set up lines and so forth over there, and they had us in a line. And from the English Channel, we had the Canadian armies, what military they had right next to there that was headed into Luxembourg and that area. Next was the First Army, I think. There was 2 or 3 Third, First, and I forget what the other one was. But we had the Americans was all across the middle, taking up the brunt of everything, and on the right next to Switzerland, there was some French forces that the Free Army that they kind of got together in England during the war. Some of the Free French come in there, and they was on our right, kind of supporting our right, and we went all the way that way. My job was a survey and instrument man, and you have A, B, C, D companies in a regiment, and you had 3 regiments, 317th, 318th, 319th, make up a division, and the division was the 80th Division, and it made the 3rd Army with a couple more divisions. And that's kind of the makeup. Now the infantry, and then we have an anti-tank outfit. Tanks are a separate thing that run. And then we had a cannon company. And our cannon companies were 105 howitzers that have a shell, 105 millimeter, and 2.5 feet long. You put 3 of them, 3 of them come shipped in a package, and they weigh 105 pounds. And you pick those up and carry them up to the guns, and you pull them apart. There is powder in bags, and there are 6 bags, and you can take out however many bags you want, and then with your elevation and so forth, you can shoot that cannon about 6 miles. That was our direct support. So we had to stay right up with the infantry. We had 6 cannons. There was a sergeant in charge of each one of them, and there was 2 corporals. One of them adjusted the gun for horizontal guidance, the other one for vertical. And my job was, I took their instrument out in front and set it up, and I had maps that I knew just about where we were and so forth, and my job was to set the gun up for a certain area, and some of the officers or somebody, we would point a target out there, which would maybe just a crossroads, to zero our guns in. And my job was to have like a transit. It was a small, what we called an aiming circle, and I had to set that up and balance that and zeroed it in, and then I would turn that around to number 1 gun, and then I'd call out a figure. And he set that on his scope, and then I'd go over and set the next one, and I'd set all 6 of them, and I lined them up so that when they fired, they would fire 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in a row, just so far apart. And we could move it forward and backwards and cover a whole pattern of an area with artillery fire. And that was my job, was to do that. Now, one day, on Armistice Day, we had pulled into an area, and I went out there and started setting up the thing, and we started to do something, and all of a sudden, just a stray German shell come in and hit one of our trucks and blew it up. There happened to be 10 guys on it. We lost 10 that day. But when that went off and the ammunition that we had went off, it went up in a big smoke. And so I knew right then and there, I better be moving, because as soon as they seen that smoke, they knew they hit something, and they started shooting their artillery in the pattern that I was talking about. And they started cutting. They come out here and hit, and I just took off sideways and run out of it. I knew better than to run forward and backwards, because I didn't know which way to go. And I run over and hid out. And when things quieted all down, I went back over there, and my aiming circle that I'd set up was still sitting there, but right in between the 3 legs around on that was a hole where a shell had landed, right where I would have been squatted. That was one of our bad days on that. We didn't know really where we was at, or just what was ahead. We had maps just for what our area was. That was headquarters' job back behind. They tried to keep us in fuel, ammunition, and food, and maps and stuff like that. On later, we come up to the Moselle River, and we had fought, and they had Germans had blown up the bridge across the Moselle River, but we got some guys over there quick enough that we saved the railroad bridge. So they threw it, the engineers threw some planks down on that, and we run our cannons across there and went up just on the hillside and set them up, and the infantry had crossed over too, and they kind of had a bridgehead in the valley there, and the Germans, we got in there and just no more got settled down, and the Germans attacked it with about 8 tanks and a bunch of infantry with them. And from where we was at, we could see them coming up the valley. We could see them. So instead of me directing fire and so forth, we just told them, and the officer in charge of the company, he told each gun, free fire. Send out some delayed charges or time charges, and have some of them burst right over the heads of those infantrymen down there and break them up. And they was doing that, and of course then the tank guys down there, they got a drift that we was up there and with this artillery doing this. So here they come, right straight at us. Well, when they come up to the road down in front of us, and they come up to the road, and they come up come up on the road, the belly of the tanks was sticking up there in the air, and we just took our guns and shot them right in the belly and set them all on fire. We burned up 3 of them. And then the tanks all left. Then the tanks left, and we kind of secured our bridgehead. And night come in, and me directing my job, I wasn't doing anything at that time, so I just took a 50 caliber machine gun and went up on the hillside a little ways to the end and set it up in case we had some infantry come around and tried to run us off, get us off of that bridgehead, because we had secured this bridgehead across the river. And if we lose that, well, we're going to have a lot of problems. So anyhow, it got dark, and I'd set the machine gun up there, and because I didn't have anything else to do but to protect this one side, and I kind of dug a little hole and kind of snuggled down a little bit, and then I just quieted down out there, and after a little bit, I heard some voices, and I listened, and it was Germans. There were some German guys talking. And I thought, oh, hell. Finally, I says, I'm going to bluff them. So I just raised up my head and I says, you damn guys over there, be quiet, shut up. I'll come over and take care of you in the morning. And then I laid back down. You know when daylight come, I was all set and was ready and to see what was going to happen. Got up, went up there, looked around. Man, they didn't like the sound of that, so they left. So while we have been talking about the Moselle River there and that crossing on that, I'm going to jump ahead and talk about this presidential citation. Because that is what this is about. And then we'll go back to Patton and where the war goes on. And because of that fighting on the Moselle River and doing that, after the war was over with, they took us down to Oberammergau, where they have the Passion Theaters, and under the eve of that, they presented us with a general order dated, order number 74, dated 1st of September 1945, and it gives World War II honors and awards to the 80th Battle Honors. To Company E Infantry Regiment, that's the one that was down on the flats down there, fighting those tanks and so forth. It goes on and tells about their story on there. And then it gives up on the Cannon Company 317th Infantry, is cited for exceptional aggressiveness, extraordinary heroism, and outstanding performance of duty, crossing the Moselle River the same day as the advanced rifle units, 12 September 1944. The Kenneth Company 317th Infantry Regiment gave close fire support and regiment during this critical operation. Following day, an enemy counterattack employing infantry and tanks. The initial force of the attack pierced our defenses, penetrating 1,000 yards to the left rear of the howitzer positions. Immediately, countermeasures reversed the attack, forcing the enemy back. German self-propelled 76 millimeter gun attempting to overrun the howitzer positions was destroyed, and all of its crews killed by direct fire. 3 other enemy counterattacks repulsed within the next few days in maintaining the Moselle bridgehead. The fortitude and intrepidity displayed by the officers and men of the Cannon Company 317th Infantry Regiment reflect the finest traditions of the armed forces of the United States. And that's a presidential citation. I think there was these our two units, and I think there was another 2 units during the Second World War that were given those, and it's kind of like a Silver Star or a Medal of Honor type of thing. But it's instead of being for a person, it's for the unit. And I think there was 4 different. This R2, and I think there's another 2 during the Second World War is all there was. And they just recently give some awards for some of the guys overseas on some of their battles over there. And I don't think was any of them given for any of the other wars, Korean and all that stuff type of thing. So it's kind of an unusual award. On the Battle of the Bulge, when we went in there and rescued those guys, they dropped supplies to them from the airplanes, and the different colors indicated whether it was food, ammunition, or what it was. And when we rescued them, then we took part of those parachutes and tore off pieces like that, and we was wearing them around our neck for bandanas to indicate that we would been in there. After the Moselle River and going on over, Patton, as a general that kind of broke in as a kid during the First World War, but he was a guy that could look at something and figure something out. His first invention, I found out later, was back in Texas down in here, and some of the Mexican people was raiding up in this area, and him as a young kid he adapted a machine gun and put it in the back of a pickup, an old pickup. And when they come riding in on our horses, well, they cranked up that thing, and he had that machine gun and chased them out and shot up a bunch of them. And that was one of his first inventions. And then when he got over there, he took some kind of metals off of some German old things that they put in the ground to keep tanks and stuff from going in there. He took some of those and welded them on the front of his tanks to tear things up and do things. And so he was kind of an inventive type of guy, and he liked to do things different. And he come up and was over in our area. Well, we'd had the Battle of the Bulge. And the Battle of the Bulge, and they'd come down in there, and the guys got surrounded, and then we broke out of there, and went over there and rescued them, and McAlfee, I think, was a general that told the Germans nuts he wasn't going to surrender, and we come in and rescued him and broke that up. Then that's when we went back over to the right, out of the way, and Patton come along, and I hadn't seen anything of him because he was really in charge of 2 or 3 divisions. He was a general in charge of 2 or 3 divisions, and he come over with ours, and I seen him at a distance or around, and heard stories about him. And they say that he'd just walk out on the daggone battlefield. I know he had pearl-handled revolvers, and he'd walk around out there and see what things was going along, bullets flying around. He was lucky too. But anyhow, Patton over there, he come over and he says, we want to just try something. And so he took some of our tanks and we took our companies. There was, maybe 500 people, something like that in that. And we broke through the German lines and went out in the country. As soon as we got out in the countryside, we went over to a little town and went in there, and there was some German soldiers in there, and we run them out. And then we went on around over some more towns and around and come back to that same town. And some of the German soldiers would come in there and we'd run them back out again. But in doing this, every time we seen a communication wire or anything like that, we tore it down. And we was just running all around, tearing up all their communications, and the Germans didn't have any idea where we were or what was going on. We got back in there, one area there, and Patton says, we need fuel, and we're running out of gas. We can't run our tanks or our trucks anymore. And he says, well, let's see, we got about so much fuel. 20 miles over here is an German airfield. So we just took off over there and went over there, and their trucks and tanks and stuff trucks and cars and stuff run off of kind of a kerosene, real cheap fuel. We couldn't burn it. But their aviation gasoline, we went to an airfield, went in there and took all their gasoline, filled all our tanks and filled all our jerry cans and got all the gasoline we needed and shot the place up and went off again. Went over to one hillside and come up on the hillside, stopped, looked down over the valley, and here was about 700-800 Germans coming up the hillside, attacking up the hillside, and they started shooting. We just kind of hunked down a little bit, And then we just raised up and just started shooting the heck out of them. And all of a sudden we decided that there wasn't nothing but just a few wooden bullets flying around. There was blanks. We shot them all, was shooting them up with live ammunition, and they didn't have any. They was on maneuvers, and they didn't even know we was there. That was kind of an odd deal. But anyhow, we went in there and just, and that kind of brought to the end of the war, really, because we was capturing people all over the place, and we couldn't do anything with them, and we'd take their stripes off, take our guns and smash up their guns, take their helmets off, and make them look much like civilians as we could, and told them, go home, the war's over with. You're no longer a soldier. This is a German flag. Now they have a red background, and as the countries was forming for the Second World War and so forth, the Italians took the black and had their black troopers and made their flags of black. Okay. So Hitler decided that he was going to have red. Okay. So that's why his flag is red. My battles going from the Moselle River and going with Patton in there and going all through. When we ended up, we was clear up in Czechoslovakia, clear up with the Russians on one side of the river, and we was on the other side. And those Russians were mean damn guys. They were tough, and we wouldn't let them cross on our side of the river. They once in a while would, I mean, the women over there in those occupied places where they was coming in, man, they was mean. And those daggone Russians would take a loaf of bread. Now, European bread is a hard, round thing. And the bakeries bake them up, and they just throw them in a truck with just sideboards on it, you know. They just throw them in there like cordwood. And that's the way they deliver it around to the stores, and you buy your bread, and that's what it is. That's the way they did that. And those Russians would take a bayonet and knock the top and the bottom off of that loaf of bread, stick it in a glass, and pour some gasoline. Pour some gasoline in the top of that bread, let it soak down through. They'd throw the bread away and then drink that. And I guess doing that through that bread took the lead out or something, and it didn't kill them, but it sure made them crazy. So that's where I was at when the war was over with, and we just pulled back into, it was kind of a military area, and set up some tents, and we just kind of loafed for about, 2 or 3 weeks, and then we started doing a little bit of training and so forth, and getting ready to go to Japan. And of course, 30 days after that, why, they dropped the bombs, and the war was all over with. So the war was over with. Me and one lieutenant come back out of the bunch that went over. The rest of the guys that were all new and people that had come in, and we shipped out, and as I said, I went over on the Queen Mary, the biggest thing you could get, And when I come back, they took me up to the shore, and we loaded us on a Colby Victory. It's a Victory ship. I got a certificate of transportation on the thing. It was a little bitty Victory ship, and it had an old white-bearded man on there. He said he was 86 years old, and he was going to retire after he hit the United States. And he says, I'm going to take you guys home. I'm going to break the record. And he says, I'm going to steam this thing into New York Harbor full steam. And he took off and went across there, and he did. He broke the record for crossing the Atlantic with that Victory ship. I thought that thing was going to fall apart before we got in. And when we come sailing into New York Harbor with that thing going wide open, I mean, all kinds of big patrol boats and stuff come out and met us. I don't know whether they put him in jail or not, but that was my trip back. From there, I loaded on a train and headed down into Arkansas and got discharged and got $50 to go home. After we got back, the exciting thing to do was went downtown and just kind of roam around and visit with all the other people that was back down there. I don't know. It was nice, but you know, it had some characteristics. Because maybe a week or so after that, I was back out there. I was downtown and walking along the edge of the sidewalk, and a car backfired, and I jumped in the ditch. I dove down to the ditch between the cars. I thought the artillery was coming in. It was still right there. Actually, all of this is 2 years, 7 months, and 7 days was all that was involved. About half of it, just about half of it, was stateside, and the other half was over there. If I hadn't have been chosen to go to that ASTP program or some of those other things that did happen to me, I would have probably been in some lot worse troubles than I did over there. I just missed the climbing up those banks over there in Dover in France by 30 days or, well, actually 60, because they was that long getting the beachhead in there. That was pretty bad. It wasn't that much of a permanent thing, and I readjusted back pretty good, but I come back home in January, and it wasn't until the next September that I got into school and started school then. After I got in school, I went to Kansas Wesleyan. It was just 3 blocks down the street from where I lived, and it was handy to go there and a lot cheaper, but I graduated from out there in '51 in accounting. I had psychology and sociology, all that stuff that you have to take. I got just a business deal, but I also got a teacher's certificate, and I taught one semester as a geometry teacher at the junior high school here in town. Practiced teaching, but I decided I didn't like that. I didn't want to do that. And so I went to work. I was gonna go work with Kennedy and Co., but they wanted me to work with a private business for a while. And so I went to Salina Supply and worked there for about 3 years while one of the guys was in the Korean War. And I worked there until he came back. And I don't know, I didn't like the office work, and I could sit there and look at the guy that been there for years, and my paycheck was the same as theirs, just starting out. And so finally, I just quit, and I went out to Canopolis Lake, and I bought a chunk of ground out there and built the Oasis. It's kind of a little bait shop. We sold groceries. We had a little restaurant deal there, sold chicken and hamburgers and what not. Ice and all kinds of stuff for campers in the 60s and 70s when everybody was camping. And then lightning hit. I'd been there 17 years doing that. And I'd been doing a little private contracting in town. So when lightning hit that thing and burned it, then I just sold it. And I come to town, and I started doing some insulation and storm doors for the government on HUD rehabilitation deals, and got started. I'd buy a house, fix it up, maybe sell it, and I'd buy another one, and I'd rent it, and buy another one and sell it, and buy another one and rent it. Pretty soon I had 20 of them. So I ended up a mean old landlord.
Is that your phone?
Yeah. Hello?
Hey, Marvin.
Yeah.
It's Chris over on Foxborough.
Yeah?
We were going to bring you some rent money tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Sorry it's a little late.
That's fine and dandy. Okay.
All right, well, we'll see you tomorrow.
That's one of my renters. He says, I'm going to have them rent for you tomorrow.